welcome to the Engaged Student Voices project. This is exciting. We've got a very great session today. So as some of you may know, some of you may not, as I see some new names as well as some returning names today. My name is Ashley Storer-Smith. I am the Student Voice Manager at the University of Nottingham Students' Union, and I'm also your webinar host for this series. So it's usually asked why myself, as someone who works in the sector, is hosting this webinar. Well, it's to make sure that we, when it comes to topics, ideas, the people we're bringing on, making sure it's relevant to the HE sector, useful conversations that I think we should be having as someone who is working on the ground. So hence why I present and run these sessions on behalf of Uni2. So as some of you may know, we do webinars a little bit differently here, and there's a lot more interaction and engagement with our webinars than usual. So we have a presentation to start off with, and for some of you who come to our events and activities before, usually expect our Q&A to happen straight after the presentation and then go into breakout rooms. We're doing it slightly differently today. So we'll be doing our breakout rooms, and half of the members of the breakout room will come with myself, and half the members will come with the webinar host. And then for the second breakout room, we will switch, so everyone gets a chance to speak to everyone. And then we'll do the Q&A at the end if anyone has any final questions they weren't able to ask or engage with in the breakout rooms. Before we move on to the session today, I'm going to invite Irene, the person who kind of makes sure that everything works backstage for me with these webinars, is going to have a quick chat about some things that are happening at Uni2 at the moment. So go ahead, Irene.
Right. Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everyone. My name is Irene Jahan, and I'm the University Engagement Officer at Uni2. And as we wait for more people to join us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce what we do at Uni2 to those new to our webinar series. So at Uni2, our main goal is to help you easily engage with the student voice. And to do that, we organize these webinars, but we also build tools. And recently, we've introduced these two new tools designed to empower student leaders and ensure representative feedback from students. So the first tool is the feedback campaign tool, and this streamlines and automates the student voice meetings. And I could say that after many interviews we had with staff and members across different universities, we found that there's significant challenges in the process of gathering student feedback and conducting these student voice meetings. So, for example, generally speaking, what we found is that student reps find themselves ill-equipped to provide representative feedback during these meetings, and also this often results or translates into unclear outcomes from these meetings or follow-up actions, which leads to not being able to close the feedback loop. So to solve this, we've implemented a solution that allows for the collection of feedback well in advance of those meetings. And reps can also summarize the feedback with the help of AI in themes, which again empowers them to have more productive discussions during these meetings. And we've also streamlined the post-meeting process, for example, eliminating any complex spreadsheets. Instead, we provide this real-time action log to have a centralized platform for recording meeting minutes, or also follow-up actions to, again, close the feedback loop, like really informing students about what had happened with their feedback. And really quickly about the second tool is the reflections tool. And drawing from insights that we've gathered from many SU professionals across the sector, including also Ashley, our webinar host as well, we've identified several pain points associated with student rep elections. For example, outdated contact information, low participation rates from students, both in voting and nomination periods. And also generally speaking, cumbersome nomination process, just to name a few. So I think all this makes the rep election time a very challenging time, a stressful time for many SUs. So to streamline this process, what we've done is, for example, we've offered automate email reminders to all parties involved. Also offering a centralized student rep database that can be updated by student rep coordinators. and a no login voting system that encourages more student participation in voting and nomination process period. Sorry. So for these both tools are available for trial at no cost. However, we do have a limited number of slots available for elections too. So if you're interested in learning more about the tools, or if you want to sign up for a trial, keep an eye on the chat, because I'll be posting a form link, and if you fill it out, I'll be in touch with you. And yes, that's all from me. Thank you so much all for your attention.
And thank you very much, Irene, for letting us know about all the great work that's happening over there, and the opportunities for our attendees. So now we're going to move on to our presentation today and to introduce our host. So we're going to be talking about diverse student representation, which is our series that we do once every 3 months. And this month we are focusing specifically on engaging with Muslim student voices. And I would like to invite Maisha, who is the Doctoral College Research Culture Lead for EDI at the University of Southampton. Thank you very much for coming on, Maisha. And we'll start with your presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ashley. Right, I'm going to share my screen. I was saying to Irene, I'm a Microsoft Teams person, so I always get a bit thingy with Zoom. Here we are. Oh, I need to switch the slide. Oh, hang on.
If you go to display settings at the top, that should be able to edit it.
It's because the Zoom thingy is like hiding the taskbar. I can't like switch it over. Okay, I'll stop sharing and I'll share the other side of the screen.
Yes, that probably work.
There we go. All good?
Perfect. All works perfectly. Go ahead.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
So hi everyone. I'm sorry for that very technical glitch. It's for like a techno moment, stuff like that happens. I'm a Teams person, that is why. I hope you're all well and you've had a really great start to the week. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this afternoon. I understand that it's many of your probably lunch breaks. So yeah, really excited to be here, and Ramadan Mubarak to anyone who's celebrating Ramadan as well. Thank you so much to Irene and Ashley for the really kind invite. I'm really excited to be here. This is a really topical kind of issue and very close to my heart. So really lovely to see so many of you here today with new and familiar faces as well. So really looking forward to the session. So as Irene and Ashley had mentioned, as part of the Diverse Student Representation series, today we'll be focusing on Muslim student voice and student experience as well, in order to support sense of belonging and student success, with opportunity, of course, for reflexive activities and sharing of best practice. By way of introduction, I'm Maisha. As Ashley mentioned, I'm the Research Culture Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Southampton. I'm also a Touchwood final year EdD student, and I hold and have held a number of national roles, which has really seen me kind of support Muslim students and students of colour at that kind of national level, working with the regulator such as the Office of Students, as well as Research England, who comes under UKRI, of course. I like to start with this slide with most of my kind of sessions. This is really just to kind of reiterate that, of course, we'll be having discussions around religion and other protected characteristics. And I realize that these are sensitive issues to discuss, particularly, sometimes with, strangers. But I really want this to be a brave space. So during, the breakout room and when it's time for Q&A, if you have a thought, perspective, opinion, or question, please don't be worried about, getting it too wrong as such. As long as you're being kind and respectful in your conduct, we should be good. I'd also really be interested to hear from you all as well. So please feel free in disclosing as much as you're comfortable doing. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it's strongly recommended, as the more that you can get involved in these topics, the more that you could take away as an individual. And I know this is being recorded, so maybe Chatham House rules might not strictly apply, but I'm sure whatever's said, within breakout rooms can definitely stay in those spaces as well. Okay, so just to bring a context to the session, I thought it'd be really good to establish what a significant proportion actually Muslim students make within UK higher education. So recent figures show that just under 300,000 Muslim students are studying at our universities, accounting for just over 10% of the total student population. The figure on the right-hand side there demonstrates that we can really expect this number to continue rising, given the fact that the proportion of Muslim students across all levels of study, so undergraduate, postgraduate tour and postgraduate research, and as well as domicile status, so our UK home and overseas students, those figures and numbers have been steadily increasing. But it's also important to consider that Muslim students, like all students, we are not a monolith. We do, of course, represent different intersectional identities as well. So again, I thought it might be important to recognize that almost 1/3 of Muslim students are also from a racially minoritized background, so a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background, which of course means that they will also experience inequalities across racial and religious lines, which I'll talk about later on as well. But despite making up such a large and growing proportion of the student population, Muslim students have been largely invisible when we think about institutional and sector policy. For example, we've seen no shortage recently of ministers, government ministers kind of compelling universities to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, despite over 70% of universities having already done so. And although that definition is widely kind of controversial, the same impetus is not applied to definitions related to Islamophobia, where currently figures suggest, I think, around 21 universities or less have adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. So this kind of implicitly implies this kind of lack of parity in how these discriminations are often regarded, where it is very possible to acknowledge the importance of both. Another recent example is this kind of tender that I've kind of screenshot on the right-hand side there for tackling anti-Semitism in education, which would see kind of £5 million delivered to a provider to roll out a program of tackling anti-Semitism across schools and colleges. Although I believe it's been mysteriously paused from a recent wonky that I read, again, like I don't think we've seen the same investment into tackling Islamophobia, which is, again, equally important. Furthermore, the work from the Aziz Foundation has noted that despite Muslim students presenting quite wide gaps in relation to access, success, and progression, which I'll explore in the next slide as well, they are largely kind of excluded from widening participation efforts, as well as the kind of broader educational landscape. So, for example, because Muslim students don't make up a kind of quote-unquote traditional widening participation group, they're often not included in things like access and participation plans. And finally, I think we can ignore kind of impact of the current geopolitical context that, is deeply affecting Muslim and non-Muslim students as well. For example, with news of the KCL SU officers being suspended for showing solidarity with Gaza, and the Oxford student who actually was kind of slandered and accused of anti-Semitism during their appearance on University Challenge, who then subsequently had those damages kind of paid for. So in sum, we're really presenting this narrative which doesn't necessarily recognize the harm that Muslim students are subject to and are unfairly being targeted and silenced on issues that they deeply care about, which again can cause severe mental health concerns, which I'm seeing, particularly with the kind of context and what's happening in Gaza right now as well. As mentioned, although Muslim students are not a kind of monolith, it would be wrong not to recognize the kind of very specific inequalities that we do face as students. So, for example, evidence shows that Muslim students are very much disadvantaged in accessing HE, succeeding within it and progressing from it. For example, even when considering to apply to university, Muslim students are often faced with quite a difficult decision about whether or not accessing student finance. So within Islam, taking out loans often then requires, paying interest on those loans, which isn't Islamically permissible. And despite David Cameron promising to introduce an alternative student finance provision which recognises and accommodates for this way back in 2013. There is still no provision, and I still see it getting brought up in Parliament today as well. Data from Muslim census actually suggests that this has impacted in around or over 100,000 Muslim students either foregoing or self-financing a university education, with those that do get, student finance loans often burdened with a level of religious guilt for having done so. For Muslim students that come to university, they are then subjected to, environments which don't fully accommodate or even villainize our kind of presence. For example, considering that it is the fasting month of Ramadan, which can coincide with exam season, I've previously argued in Wonki how the university should really be putting in place provisions to kind of account for this. It just recognizes that students are less likely to perform at their best if they're dehydrated from not drinking water, or not getting energy from food when sitting an exam in the late afternoon, for example. It feeds into, and might partially explain why, out of all religious groups, Muslim students are the least likely to be awarded a 2-1 or a first-class honours degree, which Professor Reza Ghalami notes is as the Muslim student degree awarding gap, which again, I've not been hearing any kind of sector recognition of really. Muslim students are also disproportionately targeted and branded as suspect communities since the inception of the Prevent duty. So Prevent is a government legislated duty which aims to tackle extremism within public sector kind of organizations. But evidence has shown that it has led to this over surveillance of Muslim students, Islamic societies, prayer rooms, even right down to the books that Muslim students often get out at the library. That has led to NUS's the Students Not Suspects campaign as well. And finally, for those students that do find success at university, they get their 2-1 or first-class honours degree, that does not guarantee them good graduate outcomes in the labour market, suggesting this very broken promise of social mobility for our Muslim students. So if we look specifically into Muslim student experience, we see that there are multiple inequalities transpiring within different kind of spheres of their university journey. So starting with the academic side and kind of collecting existing literature, we see that often traditional curricula, which often privileges a very Western European or colonial kind of content and context, can work to exclude other knowledges which may feel more relevant to Muslim students. Like myself, I'm sure many Muslim students have experienced religious microaggressions and Islamophobic viewpoints from both lecturers and their peers alike. And lastly, there's also quite little flexibility given to lectures or assignment deadlines which clash with religious holidays. And I think that's across the board for any kind of religious group that kind of sits outside the Christian calendar as well. In a social sense, we know that university drinking culture combined with lacking social events which cater towards religious beliefs can work to exclude students. And this is despite my research and other research out there showing that Muslim students do want to take part in extracurricular and social activities like sports teams and societies like every student does. But because they want to do so in a way that doesn't necessarily conform to kind of the traditional modes of doing so, Muslim students are kind of sat and placed outside of this kind of campus bubble, which is very kind of exclusionary in nature. And as previously mentioned, Muslim students do occupy a whole range of kind of intersectional identities, which means that they can face this kind of triple threat of oppression across things like race, gender, and religion. For example, we know that visibly Muslim women are the most likely social group to report a hate crime. Black Muslim women kind of face that intersection of misogyny, of race and gender, both within and outside Muslim communities and university contexts. And Muslim men are often represented in public discourse to be aggressive and patriarchal or radical. And all of those things kind of affect, their treatment at university as well. So what are the consequences of these experiences? Well, my research, again, looking into kind of Muslim student experience, details just how much this affects Muslim student voice, namely in that Muslim students end up settling for a less than experience rather than feel confident or empowered to speak out against kind of the institutional harm and violence that they do receive. So I theorize this happening as part of a staged process, which you can see on the screen there. And it kind of starts by Muslim students recognizing that they are not a part of the majority. Society kind of caters to the needs of the mass. So those that are minoritized aren't generally kind of included in that kind of sense. Their previous kind of our previous kind of educational journey has kind of made us kind of acclimate to an educational system that doesn't, accommodate to religious needs. So I definitely remember sitting, A-levels or GCSEs during Ramadan. I never got offered food like halal food in the school canteen. So that those kind of assumptions are then carried into higher education. So we come into university with quite low expectations of like the provisions or the level of experience that we are kind of entitled to. And so we engage in self-accommodating behavior or self-negotiation of our kind of situation, as we're probably just used to, been doing so anyway. So I've heard of Muslim students kind of praying under, stairs or, classroom, just leaving campus because they can't find the food that they really want to kind of eat, I suppose. We then kind of reach the point of satisfied settling, which is kind of being accepting and grateful of what is given to you, rather than calling for kind of systemic change over the things that aren't necessarily suitable. Again, thank you so much for engaging. I really wish the kind of session was longer. But in light of the kind of research that I mentioned and that I've conducted as well, I just wanted to ensure that universities and colleagues are really considering how best to better build a sense of belonging for Muslim students. So again, my research has kind of included over 40 kind of Muslim student voices across 3 geographically diverse universities. So much kind of rich qualitative data. And to kind of facilitate engagement, again, something that might be useful for colleagues to be aware of is I offered a peer-matched kind of option. So any student that did engage did have the kind of option to request a male or a female kind of interviewer as well, just to keep, kind of Islamically kind of appropriate as well, and an incentive. So, making sure that students weren't just giving up their time without anything kind of in offer as well. So I've created these kind of advanced HE kind of funded resources, which you can scan the QR code on the screen there to access, but essentially it kind of notes how sense of belonging, particularly for Muslim students, really does encompass the kind of social, academic and practical domains within a university kind of setting. So are we kind of meeting all 3 of these in a sense, to an extent that we can holistically provide this kind of sense of belonging? And the report in there, again, provides kind of further guidance and reflective questioning for colleagues to kind of use. But also just to kind of signpost to other resources, UK has put out practical guidance for tackling both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. So I'd really strongly encourage you to have a look at those guides. There's some really great work from the Aziz Foundation, which recognizes the inequalities related to Muslim students pursuing master's study. So the Aziz Foundation, if you don't know, provides funded master scholarships for British Muslims. And if you're not a partner within your kind of university, please feel free to kind of have a look at that and get on board that really great kind of offering as well. I'd also really encourage kind of reading this comprehensive report that came from London Met about the rise of Islamophobia. It's going back a couple of years now, but I think really still relevant, and is a great kind of example of kind of research-led action as well. And I just kind of wanted to end the presentation, 3 minutes, with some tangible kind of actions and practice that, folks here might be considering to implement in our kind of efforts to support Muslim students. So I think a really good first basic step is just for assessing, what are the kind of practical, social, academic kind of provisions that are on offer to support Muslim students, and how well aware are they of that? Similar to kind of the kind of Muslim student experience guides, is a great way of letting students know that these are the things that you do have on offer. If you haven't already done so, or do kind of hold that kind of position within your university to kind of bring forward this kind of discussion, really do consider adopting a university-wide agreed upon definition of Islamophobia. It doesn't need to be, the APPG one. It could be that one with a few kind of modifications for what that means for your university. But I think doing that in a really kind of community way will really allow for better kind of report and support kind of mechanisms and actions. Next, consider any work that you can do to kind of minimize the disproportionate effect that we know that the Prevent duty has had on our Muslim students. And given the fact that we've spoken so much about inequalities related to access, success, and progression, maybe consider how your Muslim students could be embedded into access and participation plans. Have a talk to your wider participation team if you can, because then that would lead to more targeted work into addressing or even acknowledging the existence of a degree awarding gap for Muslim students within your kind of context. And then it can impact practice. So for example, when we talk about in an academic setting of decolonizing the curriculum, how that might also include the colonizing effect that religion has had for those outside of the kind of Christian culture. I'm a really big believer in any change that you want to see happen, it really needs to have Muslim students right at the center. So consider if and where any of that work can be done as a partnership project. I only kind of briefly touched upon this, but I do really think it needs to be given more attention, especially given the current situation in Gaza. It's really just better support in place from SUs and student unions in supporting Muslim student officers and campaigns. Layla is a really great person to kind of follow on social media, which really shows the kind of mental health impact that these things are in the kind of geopolitical kind of sense, and how that's really impacting Muslim students at university as well. Next, I think I'd love to see more ring-fenced kind of support for Muslim students, again, to pursue things like master's study or PhDs, especially given the kind of financial concerns that come with undertaking further study. We're seeing a lot more kind of PhD scholarships in particular being targeted to support specific underrepresented and mainly racially minoritized groups too. So I think including Muslim students would be a really great shout, particularly as we've kind of mentioned that students say that they have a lack of role models. Well, if we can sort out the kind of PGR pipeline, in a sense, we're actively helping kind of diversify that academic pipeline. But that is everything from me. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to follow myself and Ashley and Unitu on X if you're still there. But if not, we're all on LinkedIn as well. So please feel free to follow us and connect. We'd love to hear from you more, especially if you have anything that you want to kind of add or continue the conversation on. But just, yeah, a huge thank you for listening. And I'll hand back over to Ashley and Irene to close off the session.
Thank you so much.